That is a complete misrepresentation of the science.
How severe is the misrepresentation then, Steve, in your view, in your modelling?
Okay, well, I'm not a mathematical model of economics, not climate, but I'll give two of the things which are most, it can imply what could go wrong with losing the sea ice cover over the Arctic during summer. People, and I thought this myself, that the Arctic is so far north it can't get too much radiation, what's the problem? But in fact, because the Arctic is exposed to the sun 24 hours a day during summer, the amount of solar radiation received by the Arctic during summer is greater than that received by the equatorial band. So that's the amount of energy we're talking about. The energy is going from being reflected into space, about 80% being reflected back by a full ice cover, to 80 or 90% being absorbed because it turns to being dark, absorbent water. Now, what that means is if that happens, the coldest point in the Arctic region will not be the Arctic, it'll be Greenland. And that implies the possibility, as Paul Beckwith argues, that the centre of rotation of the polar cells could move 1,000 kilometres south. Now, of course, that's going to completely disrupt weather patterns in Europe and America, which is what we're seeing with these crazy cold periods in the last 6 months. So the entire basis of Western agriculture, and Eastern agriculture as well for China, of course, and Russia, could be destroyed by losing the Arctic. It is not the sort of thing you want to exploit to say it's great for extra shipping opportunities. We want to freeze that back the way it was.
Yeah, and in fact, sometimes I worry that the hope for additional shipping opportunities may take some pressure off combating the climate change issue. So to that point, I mean, what kind of economic damage are we talking about realistically? I mean, how difficult is it to quantify this?
It is very difficult to quantify it, and that is why economists have made up their own numbers. And I use the word made up advisedly because they have simply pretended, and this is from Nordhaus's own research, that 87% of industry will be unaffected by climate change because it happens indoors. He says in carefully controlled environments, but he actually puts all manufacturing, all services, and anything done under a roof, he reckons won't be affected by climate change. Now, that's right, we have no problem. If it's wrong, we're screwed. And of course, this is a crazy bad assumption. The other is that he's assuming you can use the current patterns of weather, of temperature and GDP to predict what's going to happen with climate change. And on that basis, argues effectively that Maryland, just south of New York, which is 10 degrees colder than Florida, will only suffer a 20% fall in GDP if its temperature rises by 10 degrees. But if 10-degree temperature rises occurs, according to scientists, the entire band from 40 degrees north to south of the planet will be uninhabitable by humans because heat exhaustion will be deadly for 50 days or more, even in New York.
Okay, so these, I mean, as you say, I'm not a climate scientist either, but I mean, the reality you're putting here on the table is quite worrying and relative to some of the other estimates we've heard. But the question I have to you is, I mean, what kind of economic firepower needs to be thrown